Shabbat Shalom. Last week on Shabbat, the Jewish world lost Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks. For those who are not familiar with that name, he was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom for almost 2 decades, but perhaps he could be considered, for the time in which he was in leadership and even afterwards, very much the speaker for the Jewish diaspora and perhaps the entire Jewish world. He could easily be argued to be the most prolific Jewish teacher of our generation. He was a wonderful speaker, not only because he spoke with the Queen's English, but because of the content of what he would share. He was blunt but gentle. He was brilliant, well studied in secular and traditional Jewish sources, but he was humble. Above all, I believe he was so popular because he was able to draw out life-changing lessons for our daily lives from the ancient story of our people. His authenticity was not in being orthodox, although he was, it was in being relevant. I want to share some of his writing tonight to honor his teaching and his life, and to use his words in the coming weeks of Torah study for those who join us on Shabbat morning. But first this evening, I want to share a somewhat generic story. I read this story in a book by Nell Noddings, a professor of education. It's a story I imagine most of us have lived in some way. An eight-year-old comes home from school and slams his books down on the kitchen table. "What's wrong?" his mom says. "Math is impossible," he says. "My teacher is unfair. She's mean, she hates me, and she's stupid." Resisting the urge to yell at the child for slamming the books or calling his teacher names, the parent listens, calms her son down, and simply says, "Why don't you tell me what happened?" This is what Professor Noddings calls receptive listening. And soon enough, the child has changed his tune. The two smile at each other and start brainstorming rational solutions with a sense of hope that the future will be different than the way he walked in the room a few moments ago, and that he knows what to do now. Now I want to share a version of this story that Noddings does not share. The child is not 8. He's an adult. He is us. And it's not math that is impossible. It is the world in our life. Because the adult faced the worst loss of his or her life. I'll let you fill in whatever loss you've experienced. Loss of a job, of a parent, a spouse, or a child. Maybe it's the loss of hope of being the parent, the spouse, or having a child. Is it not in those moments that we sound just like that 8-year-old, and rightfully so? We throw our books on the table and say to the world, "This is too hard. The world is unfair. Why me?" And then we tell ourselves that no one can possibly understand what I'm feeling, and certainly no one can fix it, which is just our seemingly sophisticated way of saying the teacher is stupid. She doesn't know the answer. No one knows the answer. There is no answer. In a few moments, Cantor Kathy is going to read the verses from Genesis when Isaac meets his wife, Rebekah, and they fall in love. Isaac is in the wake of losing his mother, Sarah. She has just been buried. And this happens, of course, not long after we read about Abraham, his father, almost sacrificing him on Mount Moriah. I have to believe that Isaac was that adult 8-year-old, screaming at the world, "This is too hard. Why me? No one can possibly understand." And so now I want to share how Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks teaches this verse of Torah. The first verse that Cantor Kathy will chant tonight implies that before Isaac meets his future wife, Rebekah, and in the wake of the loss of his mother, really the only thing we know that he does is he goes out for a walk in a field. But many people translate the word to walk as a form of prayer or meditation. Here's what Rabbi Jonathan Sacks wrote. The word for walking can mean meditation, but it is related to the word for conversation. Prayer is a conversation between heaven and earth, he says. But conversation is also a prayer. For in true conversation, I open myself up to the reality of another person. I enter his or her world. In the touch of two selves, both are changed. Isaac is just about to meet the woman with whom he will share his life. For him, prayer is the prelude to a human relationship. And Sachs continues, genuine human conversation is preparation for, and sometimes is itself, an act of prayer. For in prayer I attend to the presence of God, listening as well as speaking, opening myself up to a reality infinitely vaster than my own, and I become a different person as a result. He ends the passage. Prayer is not monologue, it is dialogue. In the wake of life's disappointments, we so often feel alone. That is how Isaac felt after the loss of his mother. It is as if the world does not understand us. Or, as an 8-year-old, it is as if the world is stupid to us. But when we enter into a conversation with someone who is a receptive listener, whether that listener is God or our mother or a trusted friend, I believe we remind ourselves that the world is not stupid. The world actually knows exactly who we are, because the world is filled with people who've been through, if not the exact same thing, something quite similar. Oliver Wendell Holmes wrote, "It is our troubles that make us one with every human being in the world." Sachs reminds us that if it is our greatest troubles that isolate us, cage us, make us feel uniquely alone, like an 8-year-old who felt that math was not the world he belonged in, that it is then our greatest conversations, our moments of receptive listening, our prayerful conversations, ones with our mother, our friend, or God, that free us and remind us that we are not alone and that we need not be afraid. Because the world is not stupid at all. The world is well aware of our suffering. And just like Isaac found Rebekah after the loss of his mother, the world is filled with people who can walk this journey with us.
Kol haolam kulo Gesher Tzar Meod, Gesher Tzar Meod, Gesher Tzar Meod, Kol haolam kulo Gesher Tzar Meod, Gesher Tzar Meod. והעיקר, לא לפחד, לא לפחד כלל. והעיקר, לא לפחד כלל. The whole entire world is a very narrow bridge. A very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. The whole entire world is a very narrow bridge, a very narrow bridge. And the main thing that I recall is have no fear. Have no fear at all. And the main thing that I recall is have no fear at all. Kol haolam kulo Gesher Tzar Meod, Gesher Tzar Meod, Gesher Tzar Meod. Kol haolam kulo Gesher, Tzar, Meod.